So in this short talk, I want to concentrate on meditation, and I want to begin with a section out of Natural Liberation, which, if you have that, starts on the bottom of page 93, where Padmasambhava is talking about meditation and some of his instructions related to this. And he says, our so-called mind, which is continually aware, busy, and recalling all kinds of things, acts as the basis of the whole of samsara and nirvana. So it is given the name foundation. The root of all joy and sorrow is our own mind. So it is important, first of all, to establish this. The mind of a novice is like a wild horse. To illustrate this, to catch a wild horse, if you chase after it aggressively, it will be frightened and it will not be caught. So by enticing it with various ways and gently holding it, it will be caught and can be put to work. Likewise, if this wild mind is controlled aggressively, more and more thoughts will flow out, and obstacles will arise that produce numerous problems, such as an imbalance of the heart vital energy. By gently settling the mind in its natural state, using various techniques, genuine quiescence, that's shamatha, will arise in your mind stream. Okay? So the idea with this analogy of the wild horse is there are different ways of taming. If you ever saw the movie The Horse Whisperer, you saw how that gentle approach can be really effective. Whereas an aggressive approach, trying to really forcefully tame the mind, oftentimes creates the exact opposite of what it is that we're trying to do. So that's why this first meditation, the stillness of body, speech, and mind, is so important. A still body helps lead to still speech, which helps lead to still mind. They build upon each other as we go through these processes. So that's the basic idea of the first meditation with the stillness. So I want to talk a little bit more about meditation in general. In terms of the Eightfold Noble Path, this includes things like right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So we need to concentrate our mind in order to be able to focus. Remember, these first meditations are shamatha, single-pointed calm abiding. So the idea is to be able to focus, keep our attention on something for a long period of time. And so that concentration is very important. But the process is one of really unwiring our mind. We have habitual tendencies about doing things in a particular way. So when we talk about this wild mind, the wild horse idea, that's because of the habitual tendencies that we have. Some of those are also embedded in our DNA, the way our brain functions. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So what we're trying to do is basically rewire our brain, rewire our mind in this process. And so we're creating these new neural connections within our brain, and this requires a lot of patience and persistence. That's probably the single most important advice that I ever give on meditation. Patience and persistence. Two of the 6 perfections, which we'll talk more about at a later time. Okay? You really have to think about that patience and that persistence. It doesn't happen overnight. The analogy I often use is learning to play a musical instrument. If any of you have gone about that effort of learning to play a musical instrument, it takes time. And you have to practice over and over and over again. You practice every day. And by doing that, you train your mind and the mind-body connection to be able to hit the right notes on the piano or the right chords on a guitar or whatever the instrument might be that you happen to be working with. So it's very much like learning to play a musical instrument, and so it requires regular practice to do that. The next thing is our motivation. We mentioned the importance of motivation previously. But think about why it is that you want to do this. What is your goal? What is it you're trying to accomplish here? Are you really committed to this? And then you want to think about that, the very first thing you do anytime you sit down to meditate. What is my intention today? What do I want to accomplish today with this meditation? And we know from goal theory research that having a very specific goal leads to much better results than just a generic idea about wanting to do something. Okay? Even just a generic idea about enlightenment is only moderately helpful. If you have a specific idea that I want to achieve enlightenment today, during this meditation, okay, that's different. It's specific. And so you want to focus on what that is. Or maybe the goal's a little bit more simple than that. I want to be able to stay focused without monkey mind coming up for a period of 10 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour or whatever your goal might be. So that's the kind of thing. You want a specific targeted goal for each and every meditation session that you have. That will make it more effective. And we know that from research that's been done in the West. Okay? So this is the practice that we want to do. We know that it can be beneficial in many different ways, with lots of different motivations, so the exact motivation is not critical here. But it is key that you know what that is and that you express that. Now, generally speaking, we've talked a little bit about this previously, almost all meditations in the Buddhist tradition can fit into one of two categories. Shamatha, single-pointed calm abiding, or Vipassana, special insight. Special insight focuses on transcendent wisdom, the wisdom aspect. Whereas shamatha focuses on being able to focus our attention that then helps us with the wisdom aspect. And eventually we want to bring those two together in a unified whole. Okay, so that's where we're headed. Now there's lots of different kinds of shamatha meditation. The one that's most commonly taught in all of the traditions is a focus on the breath as it comes in and goes out. Padmasambhava does not teach that particular shamatha meditation. He starts off with this stillness of body, speech, and mind, and then the one that we'll talk about today is a focus on a specific small object, physical object. Okay? So he doesn't ever talk about, in a specific way, shamatha focusing on the breath, although that is perhaps the most common, and the Buddha did teach that as one of the first forms of shamatha meditation. And then other forms, the deity meditations that we'll talk about later on, also are a form of shamatha and so forth. And even the Dzogchen, eventually we get to that, well, we'll see that that is a form of shamatha as well, at a very advanced level. So those are some of the important things in terms of the basic form of meditation. Another is that as we go through and we learn the Buddhist practices, we go through different levels of those practices. And so in the beginning, when we look at and study a particular practice, what we are doing is paying attention to it as a form of study and a developing an understanding, a basic understanding of what that is. Then as we begin to concentrate and focus our attention more on that, we reflect on it, we contemplate it, we begin to develop more of a level of certainty about that. And then as we do the meditation, then what we're doing is actually getting the direct experience of that. Something that goes beyond our ability to articulate clearly in words, but it's a real sense of feeling, a real experience of what that is. So those are the levels that we're looking at in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here, and eventually being able to focus on that transcendent wisdom. So what we're trying to do is facilitate this process of training our mind by doing this meditation where everything becomes meditation. It's not just sitting on the cushion, but it's also everything else we do throughout our day. And so everything literally becomes meditation in that process. And that is even more important than what we do on the cushion. What we do on the cushion is just a preparation for being able to do the other things that we do throughout our day. And eventually, as we see when we do dream yoga, what we do at night as well. Another aspect has to do with the cultural and ritual aspects of the meditation. Now we can strip these meditations down and eliminate some of those things, but in fact some of them can also be helpful to us. So I think it's important to at least be aware of the benefits of the cultural and ritual aspects of this. Remember now, what we're trying to do is train our mind. Training our mind happens through the process of habituation. In fact, the word for meditation in Tibetan translates literally as habituation. Okay? So we're habituating ourselves, training our mind, and that, as we know, creates these neural connections in our brain that helps facilitate this process. And so we're trying to create a habit of this mindfulness, of this ability to focus our attention and so forth. And so as we do that, these other aspects can be very helpful in that. So when we look at ritual, ritual is a pattern that's repeated over and over again. And so even though that ritual may not be a part of the meditation, by having a habit of developing this ritual, using the ritual to develop a habit of repetition, that then becomes helpful to you in your meditation. Okay? So one benefits the other. So it's important to be aware of that. So the ceremonial aspects and so forth of different things that we do can actually be a benefit to us in our actual meditation practice as well. So we looked at those, we see how they can benefit our practice, and that's the important thing, is we understand that these can help us as we go ahead and live our life. Now the actual training of mind then is the central part of what meditation is all about. So we develop this awakened consciousness as a part of this, and the goal is to achieve this sense of deep inner peace as a part of that, and joy. And so that becomes a part of the brain connections that we are developing as a part of this. And then we apply this principle of mindfulness as we go about doing the other things in our day. So we're habituating ourselves, not just when we're doing the meditation, but we're also habituating ourselves as we go about the other things that we do during the day. Focusing over and over again on that present moment. Remember, in Buddhism we divide everything into moments of time. And that can be helpful to us as we go about these practices of mindfulness. Being mindful now, being mindful now, being mindful now. And these different moments of time throughout the day and the night as well. And so we do that, and we think about them, we focus on them. But one of the things we have to be careful about is going too far with that, in the sense of we can do it too intensely. Remember when I was reading the section from Padmasambhava, he said we want to relax into it as opposed to being too aggressive about the process. So keep that in mind too. You want to relax into it. And what happens is that as we do this, we become more and more relaxed as we go about doing things during our day. And so that can be really helpful to us as well, in terms of how we're doing things and how we respond to things that happen to us during the day as well. And we talk about afflictive emotions and so forth. We'll talk more about those later on. But when things happen to us during the day, how we respond to it is really important. And when we're relaxed, we're more likely to have a little bit of a gap between the stimulus and our response. And when you have that gap, you make a choice. You have an opportunity to make a choice about what your response is. If there's no gap, you have the stimulus and the immediate response. Okay? It becomes a habitual response. And a lot of our responses are done that way. But as we know from behaviorism, the research on behaviorism is a philosophy of psychology, if you will, or a theory of psychology. Then behaviorism talks about stimulus response. It's an automatic kind of thing. But we know that when you create that gap, all of a sudden you have an opportunity to choose the response as opposed to just automatically respond. So that's a very important part of this whole process. Another thing that we know, we've mentioned a couple of times, is that when we begin this process, it's very easy to have the experience of what we call monkey mind. And the mind is just going all the time. You know, we try to calm the mind. We talked about stillness of mind. And it just doesn't happen. I mean, it lasts a very, very short period of time. And all of a sudden we discover we're thinking this, we're thinking that. We let it go. Pretty soon there's another one coming back up. What am I going to do this afternoon? Or how am I doing with my meditation? Or something else comes up, and it's constantly coming up. But here's something you can try. Try thinking constantly without ever stopping. Okay? Most people can't do that either. So we find that although on one hand the brain, and this is actually a DNA kind of a function of the brain is really about helping us survive. And so in the very early forms of development and evolution, it was extremely important to be alert and thinking about what's going on all the time. Monkey mind was important to survival. Okay? It still is to some degree, and certainly in some places in the world it's more important than it is in others. But because we have this, we refer to precious human life, we'll talk about that later on, we have an opportunity to do these practices without that kind of constant pressure just to survive. Having that special opportunity, we're able to do this in a way that we're able to tame our mind and let go of that. And that enables us then to achieve enlightenment. That's one of those foundational principles as well as activities that we need in order to be able to achieve enlightenment. So we do that, we monitor our attention, how we're doing all the time, this monkey mind that comes up, we begin to let go of that, and as a result of that, then we calm ourselves, we calm our mind. Shamatha, remember, is single-pointed, that's the focus part, calm abiding. So that's the other part. We ease ourselves into that. In terms of the best way to train the mind, one of the things is to have a specific time and location for doing this each day. The best times tend to be in the morning. First thing in the morning is a good time for most people, or some people like to do it last thing in the evening before going to bed. Those are probably the two best times, but it depends on you. Maybe noon is the best time, or late afternoon, or later in the morning, or everybody has their own times that are best to do this. But find what that time is and try to make that a very regular time for you to practice. Now, in between times, you also do little mini meditations, if you will. You do mindfulness activities and so forth. But it's best to do this on a very routine basis. Remember, we're talking about habituation. Okay? Routine is extremely important in habituation. So find that time and do that. The best location is one that is quiet. So find some place that you're not going to be interrupted or disturbed, and then you can do that. Outside is always great if you have some place that you can do that. A patio or something can be a great place to do that. But inside is also a good place to do it. Whether you sit in a chair with your feet flat on the floor, as long as your back is straight, that's important. Or if you sit on a pad or a cushion on the floor, that's also a good way to do that. And if you can do that 7-point posture of Virachana, that's really nice. Or kind of a modified version if you can't do the lotus posture where you do the crossed legs with your feet on the top of your thighs, which most of us can't do, but any approximation is also fine as a part of that. The atmosphere can also be important. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the container here in a moment, but that can be helpful. And wearing comfortable clothing, something that you can sit in and relax in that's not going to be binding on your posture or becomes uncomfortable and becomes a source of annoyance, that would not be helpful. So you want to avoid those kinds of things. The container, the environment in which you meditate. We know from research and experience that that container is very important. And so it's good to do things, little things, that make that environment helpful to you in doing your meditation. Something here is that it's meaningful. Okay? And so there's different things that you can do. You can set up a little shrine, or you can set up a room, a complete room in which to do your meditation, if you have that kind of place available to you. You can put candles in it, you can burn some incense, you can have images of the Buddha. A lot of people find those meaningful and helpful. So any of those kind of things that you can do can be very helpful to your practice. It doesn't need to be expensive. The very first shrine I had a picture of a Buddha that was actually on a card that came as part of an advertisement in the mail. Cost me nothing. Okay. I bought a little incense burner that I could set along with it, and then a little glass container to put the tea light in to burn a candle. That was my shrine. That was the whole thing. Now, since then, I've bought various statues and other objects, and I have Thangka paintings, and I have a rather elaborate shrine. But you don't have to do that. Okay? And if you do it, you can certainly do it over years of time. You don't need to go out and spend thousands of dollars immediately buying all of these objects to set up the environment. But the environment itself is very important as a part of this, and the most important of the environment is that it's meaningful to you. Okay? The details are not particularly important. What you do that is meaningful to you is what is important there. I mentioned ritual before. I think we've talked about most of these things, developing and setting that up so that you're doing all of these things on a very regular basis, a routine basis, and that all helps to habituate this in the process of developing your own meditation.